how about we do, how about we go over like general American imperialism, and then maybe we'll go into the specific of Spanish-American War. So general idea of American imperialism, 1867 to 1914, that America is going through a transition period from being a country that is not involved in world affairs to a country that eventually becomes a superpower. Yes, Emily, question?
Yeah, what made them want to become like imperialist? Like what gave that their idea then?
Excellent question. All right, anybody else want to tell us imperialism? What did we study through the year? Why did they want to become imperialist?
Manifest destiny and social Darwinism.
Okay, so that's inside the United States, but we're saying when we go outside of the United States?
That like all the European countries were like conquering other territories. So like they wanted to get in on it.
Very good. Okay, so that's one reason. There's definitely a great causation question, Emily, why they want to be moving around the world. And that's something that you might want to get, a causation question. So let's just get into it. So historically, and this is where we might get a question of continuity and change. Historically, America was all about isolationism, no entangling alliances. That's something that Jefferson and Washington were constantly talking about. And if we move on, historical America, starting in the early ages of the Republic, only just controlled the 13 colonies. And that's why they did not think about imperialism outside of the United States. And then we talked about manifest destiny the last 70 years after that, that America basically conquered all the way to the end of the West, and mission accomplished, everything is under American control. And that's where we're starting to move and think about, okay, what else can we conquer? Once America conquered everything inside the United States, east to the West, finished manifest destiny, then some people are saying, okay, what else? Where else can we find resources? So one point of other resources, of course, is the purchase of Alaska that the United States did under Secretary William Seward. They purchased Alaska, which was not seen like a great attractive buy in 1867, that a lot of people call it Stuart folly. But eventually, by the way, they found natural resources in it and oil and so forth. So it turned out to be a great purchase. But in 1867, it didn't seem like a smart move. Also, if, as Elisheva was mentioning before, like you look at other European nations, or somebody was saying about envy, England controlled, like in 1921, like almost 20% of the land in the world, like Australia, Africa, Canada, and Americans are saying, why can we not be like that? So it's a transition. This is a transition period, if you write an essay about it, from being isolationist in the 1800s versus interventionist in the turn of the century. Anyone wants to read isolationism? Who wants to read? Leah?
Avoid conflicts with other nations wherever possible.
And then intervention?
Intervention, engage other nations in order to promote the national interests of the United States.
Okay, so we're talking about this exactly, transition around the turn of the century from isolationist, which is American foreign policy, to more intervention in American policy and different presidents. So now to the questions of motivations, why they're doing that. First off, we talked about social Darwinism. Anyone remember?
Ayala is waiting in the waiting room.
Let me see. All right, she's in. Thanks. Let's continue. So what's social Darwinism? Emily?
It's basically when you're saying that one group of people are more superior than the other because of like genetics or something.
Yes.
And it's basically saying that the WASP community or whatever, like that's what they were saying, is much better, and that, so they should go and spread the wealth like the white man spread it.
All right, that's a specific poem. Anyone remember who wrote that poem?
Rudyard Kipling.
Kipling, you see AP Europe, it's paying off. Very good. So that's a specific poem. That's not a part theory, especially of the social Darwinism. Okay, social Darwinism is one reason or motivation that we're talking about why the Americans, like the Europeans, are interested in imperialism. They kind of believe that they're superior, that you know, that they need to go and like educate or liberate, you know, those who are less fortunate. And social Darwinism also takes basically the idea of Darwinism, which is a theory in nature, and applies it to people, which is survival of the fittest. A certain races like the Americans are just stronger, and they're just meant to survive and strong. Also, when we talk about expansion markets, there's always motivation connected to money. More places you're going to open for business, more countries you're going to open up to trade with. There's more options to sell your goods, and America is producing a lot of goods, or maybe they have some natural resources that America is lacking. So markets are always good as motivation. It helps stabilize crop prices. If you have too much overproduction in the US, you can sell it to other places, and you might also help get things that you need for your own country. And we talked about this cartoon, that you might get a cartoon and seen as a positive or a negative. So kind of like before imperialism in a negative way, or like after imperialism, seeing people being more like civilized. So there's many explanation, kind of a civilized mission. We're helping the less fortunate one. And of course, spread of Christianity. Religion is always a big thing with Americans and Europeans, that they think that the native population lack religion, so they can spread their Christianity. Another thing, if you want to give outside information in the exam, yes, you can definitely mention Kipling is The White Man's Burden, a poem that was written in, again, if you give the context, in the after the Spanish-American War, specifically the Philippine-American War, that Kipling is writing this poem and basically saying that, you know, it's the white man's burden to help the half-child, half-devil kids, as he mentioned in his poem. And if you want to quote like half-devil, half-child, that kind of shows that you actually know what the poem is about. So again, you don't have to write the whole poem. You mention his name, you mention the name of the poem, you mention like a line from it that shows that you know outside evidence completely. Anyone who wants to read the poem with passion? Leah heard passion, she's like, I'm on top of it. Yes.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best sea breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. You new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child.
See that the last line, half devil, half child, kind of shows you his whole perspective on them. So they're child, they're not a grown up yet. Half devil, it shows you like really, because you know, just because they have the wrong religion. Very extreme. Naval bases is also great for imperialism. If you're going to be a superpower, you need a navy to move across the world. The US needs, I don't know, to go into China or Japan, they need a place to refuel their ships. So something like, let's say Hawaii is in the middle, like Pearl Harbor, so that's a good place to occupy, or Cuba or something like that. We mentioned another outside information, Alfred T. Mahan, who wrote a very influential book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And basic thesis, great nation must have a great navy. So that's where a lot of Americans are also thinking, like Teddy Roosevelt, who read that book, that America needs a big navy. And of course, America eventually went over to new territory and started to grab some territory, such as the annexation of Hawaii is a good example in the middle. So again, the US is here, Hawaii's in the middle, Asia is over here. So this is a great place for refueling American ships. And of course, projecting American power. America is showing strength by grabbing territories, putting fear in its opponents. They're saying like, you know, America wants to be seen as a superpower. And that's another question. I'm not sure they're going to ask about like, you know, necessarily what are how do people react to that. They'll probably be interested more in causation, but if they ask about the effects, we can definitely mention that America intervention in Latin America and the Philippines and the Cuba created a lot of anger and frustration in countries that thought that America was going to give them independence, but ended up that America, like other European nations, were just interested in taking over the territories to exploit them. So there was a lot of disappointment from that. All right, so any questions about just kind of causations in general, why America got in to conflict? We had a DBQ about this topic, I think like 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, again, it could be again, but I'm not sure that they want to do it again. Sorry, do you want to specifically the Spanish-American War to review?
Yeah, I want that.
You want that? Okay. So let's just go quickly. And again, there's 4 questions, so we don't know specifically. Let me pull that up. And again, this is just review. We're kind of doing a crash course. We're not going into every little details. All right, so the Spanish-American War that we talked about, the main idea we're talking about, the Spanish-American War is important. 1898 is a turning point in American history. It kind of puts America as a world power, like the first bigger war. So that's the question somebody was mentioned before, how they're transitioning from being an isolated nation to a world power. The year we want to remember is 1898. And again, in this exam specifically, years is not that impressive because it's an open book exam, but just so you at least know that it's the turn of the century that America becomes power. So it starts off with the story in Cuba, that Cuba has a conflict against Spain. Spain is an imperialist nation going all the way back to Columbus in 1492. And America got into the war to help Cuba's independence. They won the war, and now the question is what's going to happen with Spain. They wrote the Teller Amendment in 1898 that Cuba will not be annexed to the United States, not officially at least. So before the war, some people in America were afraid that America is going to become an imperialist nation, so they were interested in preventing that. And of course, the cause of the war, as you recall, is the USS Maine, which entered the Havana harbor. And then as far as we know, there was an explosion and many Americans died. That was the cause for the war. Yes, Emily?
I was watching a video and he said that like they did some is this correct that like they did some negotiations, but even though Spain like fulfilled all of them for them not to go to war, they still went to war?
Yeah, I mean, America gave very, very harsh condition to Spain about like giving them all the territory before the war. So basically, America was interested in the war. That's the big picture. Spain was willing to negotiate a little bit, but America, they basically used the Maine as an excuse to go into war. They never really fully investigated that. They just assumed that the Spanish blew up the Maine without even real evidence behind it. But that was the cause for the war itself. Pulitzer Prize, anyone remember? How's that connected? Pulitzer Prize, Spanish-American War.
Because what's called? Because like Teddy Roosevelt was like, it's like when you make like a big compromise or something like that, right?
Yep. Roosevelt, the name Pulitzer. Spanish-American War. Anyone remember newspaper publishers?
Was he a yellow journalist?
Oh, yellow
journalism. Very good. So let's write it down. Yellow journalism. One of the causes also for the war. So yellow journalism is another big causation, if you want, for entering the war. We're talking the turn of the century that newspapers are becoming very, very important in sensationalizing and trying to push towards a war. 2 big publishers we might want to remember is William Randolph Hearst from the New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer, New York World. Pulitzer is actually known for high quality journalism, and Hearst gets into the newspaper business because he wants to be like like Joseph Pulitzer. But sensationalizing headlines that Hearst is doing is making his paper sell a lot more than Pulitzer. So Pulitzer has to lower his standards to keep up with the publication. And that's why both papers end up being sensationalizing. The term, that's why we get yellow journalism, is like kind of like a gossip journalism. So both of them are kind of like interested in promoting to go to war because war sells more newspapers. Okay. So that's where the headlines of like explosion and boats without really any evidence behind it. And it's kind of like the whole like remember the Maine, kind of like remember the Alamo. Also, it's known as the Splendid Little War. Teddy Roosevelt takes advantage of this war to kind of promote his career and become a national hero. He and the Rough Riders, of course, Teddy Roosevelt in the center here. He joins the war after being Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And America finds itself basically involved in Cuba in a war and also in the Philippines. And the war ends in 1898 with another, as many of Treaty of Paris, where for $20 million, Spain basically seceded to America, Puerto Rico, free Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam. So America kind of gains control over 4 territories from Spain at the end of the war. And America gives $20 million kind of compensation to Spain. So the kind of this cartoon can show America, the American eagle. That's another symbol, of course, for the United States, kind of covering all of the world under American control. And Platt Amendment is written in the end of the war that that basically Cuba is under American control, that they cannot sign any treaties without U.S. approval, that the UN can intervene whenever they want. And Guantanamo Bay, which is a base that we still own to this day, is kind of a naval base under American control. So that's pretty much the Spanish-American War, which leaves a legacy again of resentment and hatred. We have bad relationship with Cuba to this day, and it goes back to this war. All right, so any questions just about the Spanish-American War? That's just a quick, big overview. Not something is not clear.
Who was the guy who said it, like called it a splendid little war?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, that was Teddy? Okay.
Yes, Teddy Roosevelt is an example if you need to plug in outside evidence or somebody who's an imperialist, you can plug him always as an example of imperialist. He's somebody who wanted to go to war, somebody felt that the U.S. needs to exude power. He did it as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and when the war started, he left his family at the age of 42 just to join the war, to be a war hero, and that's exactly what happened. Now, after the war, the Philippines thought that they were going to get independence, but they found themselves under American control, and that started another war, the Philippine-American War, which America kind of got involved in a very long conflict. The war also affects, is Teddy Roosevelt is propelled to run as vice president to, he's vice president to who, anyone remembers?
McKinley?
William McKinley, very good. Also, there was questions about the territories that people live there. Are they American citizen or they're not? What's the status? So we have some insular cases, and we also have the anti-imperialist league. There's some people who are speaking against the war. Not everyone is for this war. Anti-imperialist league, like Mark Twain, is a very big critic of the Spanish-American War. Andrew Carnegie, who's a famous industrialist. Mark Twain, for example, said this should be the flag of the United States. He specifically attacked Teddy Roosevelt. They had a back and forth about them. So imperialists always, when the debate comes, should you control over a country? Should you let it go? So imperialists always saying, you know, like Filipinos are not capable of running their own government. We need to be there to help them. And the anti-imperialists are basically always saying that American values are being sacrificed. You're ruining everything just for the cause of getting more territory. So that's pretty much what we need to know for the Mexican-American War. Yes, Jen?
So we go over the like Alien and Sedition Act, like that whole thing again.
All right. Anyone remember Alien and Sedition Act? Emily?
They were basically, the Alien Act was that you have to like limit the amount of people who come in, like the no. It lengthened the amount of years that you have to be living in America for you to become a citizen. And the Sedition Act said that you can't speak against the president and the government in a time of war.
Okay. And what's the context of the Alien and Sedition Act?
I think it was what's it called, by the War of 1812.
At the War of 1812.
Jefferson, by Jefferson, Tara?
Who's the president?
John Adams.
The president is John Adams. So Alien and Sedition Acts, the presidency of John Adams, and what's going on in the background to the legislation of these laws?
Is that like the quasi-war?
Yes. So there's a semi-war, quasi-war with France. Not officially declared. France breaks relationship with the United States. They attack American ships, and there's kind of pressure on John Adams to do something about it. He's getting criticized in the media, and eventually, not that he's really interested in that, his cabinet convinces him to pass the Alien and Sedition Act that he actually does. And we mentioned them also in the context that you can say that there might go against the Constitution, like the Sedition Act contradicts what?
The right to freedom
The
of
First
speech.
Amendment.
Freedom of speech. Okay. So does that make sense? Any question?
Or was it concluded that like it was fine because it was in a time of war, or no, because it wasn't a real war?
Well, this is an ongoing issue in every war that America has, that people take cases to the Supreme Court and say, like, you know, you're suppressing my rights. That specific time, nobody took it to the Supreme Court, but we mentioned that Jefferson and Madison reacted to it by passing what? What did Jefferson and Madison react to it by passing what laws? Or resolutions? Anyone remember? Kentucky
resolutions.
Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. So as far as Jefferson and Madison's is concerned in the Kentucky, anyone remember what's Kentucky and Virginia resolutions?
It basically says that if the government does anything that they don't think is okay, they have the right to like leave the union.
So yes, Jefferson's a little bit more extreme than Madison, but the basic gist is yes, that they believe that if the laws that are passed are not constitutional, that they have the right to ignore the laws, or more extreme version, actually even leave the United States. So that basically gives us the doctrine of nullification. That is something that goes up throughout the nullification crisis and up to the Civil War, the 1860s. So they're using this whole ideology. Does that answer the question, Jen? All right.
Then there was also like 2 more times where America did something like that, where they like took away people's freedom of speech.
Yes. Well, I mean, it comes usually around war. That's easy to remember. We have it in World War I, you know, like someone like Eugene Debs that speaks against like the war and gets arrested and sent to jail because there's like a sedition. There's also espionage or sedition act during that time. It happens in World War II. So yes, during times of war, it's a back and forth that constantly goes on in American history. My freedom of speech versus we're in a time of war, like your rights are being suppressed. And specifically in the case of World War I, a case goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules specifically, they're saying what is known as clear and present danger, that in time of war, that you might take away the freedom of speech for the better good of the United States. So the Supreme Court rules in that specific case, that stuff. Same thing in World War II. And again, they won't ask about World War II, so that's fine. Let's see what else we got. We also mentioned that we have 3 different presidents that have 3 different viewpoints about foreign policy during that time. Anyone remember? The turn of the century when it comes to dealing with other nations.
I know one of them, Teddy Roosevelt, said like a big stick policy where like you should have like you should be like, oh look, I have like a huge navy, but you don't have to use it. But then if someone like steps on your toes, I guess you use it.
Yes. So there's different policies regarding that. Teddy Roosevelt is one of those policy. So another way of just once America is kind of like from the Spanish-American War, start to move around the world, they're starting to exude influence in other places if they might ask. There's imperialism in China, for example, that we mentioned, what is known as the open door policies, that a lot of other European nations already conquered China, that the US is also interested in getting into China and having sphere of influence. So they want to exploit other nations the same way the United States is exploiting the same time. Chinese react to taking advantage by the U.S. and European nation, what is known as the Boxer Rebellion. We mentioned that. We mentioned the Platt Amendment. So we have Teddy Roosevelt, who becomes president. How does Roosevelt become president? Anyone remembers?
The
Bull-Moose Party.
How does he become president?
Doesn't he
Because
die?
the Democrats were split between two different parties. So
That's the Republicans.
well, the Republicans are split between two
But
different
that's a different
parties.
time. Before that, that you guys were talking about his like third run for president. How did he become president the first time around? What happened to McKinley?
Didn't he die?
Assassinated.
How
He
did
was assassinated and he was the vice president, so he stepped up.
Very good. Stepped up. He didn't have any. He's like, I'm going to do it, guys. No, it's like, you know, it's like the president died and he was like, ooh, I get the job. I was like, oh, play it cool. Okay, sorry. It's so sad. He's like, yes. But he was like, no, it's very sad. So yeah, he became president by accident because the president got assassinated. Nobody really wanted him, from the Republicans at least, to be president. So foreign policy at the turn of the century, the furthest we're going to go probably is up till Taft. I don't think they're going to ask about Wilson, but just in case. Foreign policy, we have three presidents at the turn of the century, and all three of them have different approaches to foreign policy. Teddy Roosevelt, we mentioned correctly, he's got the big stick diplomacy. He's more of an interventionist kind of type of guy. William Howard Taft is interested in the money aspect of that, so he's got more dollar diplomacy. And Woodrow Wilson, you always want to connect him to the term moral, because he's kind of like the son of a preacher, so he's thinking about relationship with other countries based upon their, you know, how do they treat their people, their moral action. That's more important to him. Okay, so Roosevelt lacked the African proverb of speak softly and carry a big stick. So he wanted to keep European out of Americas as much as possible. So basically very, very similar to the Monroe Doctrine. And basically use force to defend America. The difference between him and Monroe is by the time Monroe wrote the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. didn't have a big navy or didn't have a big military power. In the time of Roosevelt, however, things have changed, and now America actually has big military power to exude power in the Eastern Hemisphere. So this cartoon, you might kind of see it, that Roosevelt is kind of like taking these boats and basically like kind of closing over the territory for any other European nations to come. We also know that as president, he sent a big naval fleet basically to go around the world, kind of to show American power. So Monroe Doctrine, if you want to remember, 1823, President Bush had like read my lips, no new taxes, and then he became president and he raised taxes. So saying read my lips is not a smart thing. But anyway, Monroe said no new colonies in North and South America in 1823. And Roosevelt basically takes upon that legacy and makes sure that European nations do not interfere in North America. So he's kind of known as the policeman in Latin America. If there's going to be cartoons, a lot of time Teddy Roosevelt, a lot of time he is appearing as a policeman, and the context to that is that he actually served as a police commissioner in New York. So that's where he gets the image that time. By the way, cartoonists, they love Teddy Roosevelt because he's a very interesting caricature. You know, he's got the big hat, like because he was a cowboy for a few years. He's got the big glasses, the big mustache. So cartoonists love these people you can kind of play around with and kind of like stretch them up a little bit. This is the age, you know, the media is, there's still cartoons a lot. So we talked about canals. Anyone knows what this canal is? General knowledge.
Canal.
Yeah, the Panama Canal.
No, here, look at this.
No, the one with, it's something that starts with a C. I forgot what it's called. Constantinople.
Erie Canal.
Anybody been to Israel?
Suez Canal.
The Suez Canal, thank you. So there were canals built in the 19th century. It's not the first time it's been done. It's a very, very complicated thing to build. But Americans are also very, very exhausted for going under South America to travel to the West Coast. It's getting old. So the idea was to build a canal where?
Panama.
Between Colombia.
Okay, so it seems like this is the thinnest strip to build something around. So that's where they're like, that's where the background to the building of the Panama Canal. And Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, supports Panamanian rebellion basically to get access to build this canal. So that's definitely like a big stick interventionist diplomacy. You're actually sponsoring a rebellion to get a canal being built. So support for the rebels sounds good for the America. Afterwards, America starts building the Panama Canal, which is completed in 1914. Again, another example if you need for showing America becoming a superpower. Quickly, we mentioned that William Howard Taft is interested in dollar diplomacy, so favoring relationship with nations that have more business with the United States. Protect American business in Latin America. So that's the America general idea. And afterwards, finally, Woodrow Wilson, which I'm assuming is not going to be in this test, more interested in supporting democratic governments in Latin America. There's a lot of dictatorship in South America, in Latin America, so he's interesting, kind of like to bring in the ideals of America. Remember, he entered World War I, and I remember what his famous slogan to enter World War I was?
To make the world safe for democracy.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing you gotta remember about Wilson, like the 14 points. He's interested in exuding moral diplomacy based upon that and bringing values such as democracy, equality, and so forth. And Wilson is very, very big influential because a lot of Americans, future presidents, when we're going to go to war, will mention, that, like we're fighting for democracy, we're spreading American ideals. So all of them kind of like copied from Wilson. Such a harsh word, plagiarizing. You can't say it anymore. Got inspiration from it. Anything else? Okay, what other topics would you like to cover for the exam? What do you think you're weak at?
Maybe like I think it was who's the guy who had all the different bills and things? FDR, right?
Yes.
After the
The
Great
New
Depression.
Deal.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that that's further up in the material. I'm assuming that won't be in the exam, but if you want to mention FDR, we can go over it. All right, let me see. So one option to go about it, it could be a causation question that they might want to ask about what leads us into the war. What if it's going to be a question about about the New Deal? Everyone is going to be, Ayala, you saved us. Mr. Macklin was saying it was not going to be FDR. I'm like, all the information is due to you. It's like, all right. So a little background to the whole New Deal. Of course, questions they can have is causation, what caused the Great Depression, you can go about it, or effects of the Great Depression, or effects of the collapse of the American economy, or continuity and change. How did the Great Depression change, to what extent? I think most of the questions they might go in for evaluate to what extent. That's kind of the format they've been using the last few years. And it's like question that you answer: big change, little change, a lot of change. So you want to evaluate the sort of thing when you write in a DBQ format. And again, remember in the DBQ, you're trying to look at the 5 documents and divide them into 2 groups. See if the groups can fit together, that one is more extreme and one is a little bit less. Maybe after this, we'll check out one more DBQ before we finish. So we mentioned the election of 1828. We talked about the 1920, that the economy is really, really booming in America and doing very, very well. And Herbert Hoover gets elected to be the 31st president of the United States by a huge margin, and the American economy is soon doing very, very well. Thank you very much. But under the surface of this great economy, we have a lot of problem, and the problems start from the fact that a lot of people, credit is very cheap. A lot of people lend money from the government, and there's not too much regulation in the economy or the stock market. So it seems that the American economy is constantly moving up in the 20s, but anyone who understands a little bit finances might see that there might be some problems such as buying on margin. And I remember what's buying on margins?
Is it like you pay back for the product over time?
You buy stocks with money that you don't have based upon future profits that you will make. So that's kind of like a lot of shady business or speculation. Millions of Americans are invested in the stock market and they don't really know anything about what they're investing in. So that's another problem. Everyone gets loaned for stuff. So that's the kind of problems underneath this market. So the stock market is going up until eventually at October 29th, the stock market crashes. And that basically starts the beginning of what is known as the Great Depression. The president at the time, Herbert Hoover, is being blamed for that. We have, it's such a general theory, always have to remember, anything bad happens, it's always the president's fault. It wasn't Hoover necessarily that caused the Great Depression, but as far as Americans are aware, it happened during his presidency, so he's the one to blame. So Hoovervilles is a reflection of the name given to all these shanty towns that are being developed during that time. They nicknamed them after the president. We have other problems such as the Dust Bowl, which is more like an ecological disaster that happens during that time. Big dust storms that are going across the plains. We have a lot of people known as the Okies leaving, going out west for better jobs. The peak of unemployment is 25% that we're talking about. Even though another way, if you look in race relation, Black unemployment is higher. So just remember, like if we talk about race and gender, that usually when we talk about like, it starts up with white men's, suffering, and then it moves to the fact Blacks always have it worse than whites. And a lot of times, women are not calculated, but there's very high, the women get paid less and they're not calculating a lot of time, but there's a lot of women during that time that have to take second jobs or to do anything they need to help finance the family. Or when the Great Depression hits, a lot of family break apart and, women have to take responsibilities to try to pay the bills in the family. That's a famous picture from that time, the suffering of a mother who's like thinking about the future. By the way, it's interesting today with the pandemic, they constantly compare us to the Great Depression to see what happened during those days. They didn't have Zoom during those days, I can tell you that. Let's continue. What else? Also, the question is like, what should the president do? Should the president intervene in this great crisis or not? So what's Hoover, if you write about Hoover's POV?
He said that everyone should be an individual and give charity and help each other out, but the government, it's not the federal government job to do anything.
All right, so why is he saying that it's not the government job? Why? Okay, that's an example of how we can do a POV analysis. If you get, say, a speech for Hoover. So why Hoover point of view is that it's not the government's job to intervene? Anyway.
That it was unconstitutional because it goes it's more than the executive power. He can't directly intervene. That's what he claimed.
I mean, you can definitely say that, yeah, maybe it's not my job as a president to do that, but the general idea, not just by law, but the general POV of the United States economy, what has always been American viewpoint on the economy?
Laissez-faire and capitalism.
Laissez-faire and capitalism. It goes back to this whole Adam Smith idea, that this is like a free economy. If you're successful, good for you. If you're not successful, it's not the government's job to help you, okay? That's something that's been going on for all American presidents. It doesn't matter if you were a Republican, a Democrat, they both kind of agreed on this general idea. However, now because the unemployment is in the millions, some people are saying, well, yeah, but by not interfering in the economy, it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse. So now certain people are saying maybe the government needs to step in and make a change, okay? He also makes things worse with the bonus army that comes to the White House to demand their military bonus to come early by sending sending soldiers basically to disperse them and destroy their camp. So that's another example of the lack of sensitivity from President Hoover to understand how bad this conflict is. He sends MacArthur over. The point of the story is that Hoover, like most American president, does not understand how badly this situation is, and he does not do anything for American government intervention during that time. And that only changes with the election of a new president, and that's President
FDR.
FDR. Okay, probably one of the most famous presidents. So let's just finish with that quickly. So we have election in 1932, and overwhelmingly, FDR is winning all across the United States. Why is he winning by such big numbers?
Because everyone hates Hoover for the Great Depression.
Yes, because everyone blames Hoover for the Great Depression. Probably any candidate that ran in 1932 would have won against Hoover. FDR is very, very important, even though I'm thinking in this exam they won't get as far. By the way, there's always been teachers every year. They're like, this year is going to be the New Deal. I feel it. This year, but we've been saying that for like 10 years, but who knows? Maybe it's this year.
Even in past years, it never got this far?
No, it got far. By the way, we had a lot of exam up to the 1980s. So they got to the end. But I'm thinking this year because school was like out in March, so some schools had problems coming back in. I think they won't think it's nice to give a topic that was just so recent because some people didn't even get to FDR. But, I can be wrong. So FDR, most important thing about him, that he comes from a wealthy family, that he experienced polio at the age of 39, so he couldn't walk for most of his life. And he's the longest serving president in American history. Served for 12 years, got elected 4 terms as president. So very, very important president. In his first inaugural address, his famous lines are, "The only thing we have to fear is..."
Fear itself.
Fear itself.
Very good. See, he's a great public speaker, which also works very good for that time because people need a little motivation. He comes up with what is known as the New Deal. So instead of Hoover non-interventionists, he's transitioned into intervention with the 3 R's: relief to those who are suffering, recovery of the economy, and reform, trying to change the economy to prevent a future disaster like this. So the big takeaway before we go into the details is that this is a big turning point if you do continuity and change, because up to the Great Depression, America was like non-interventionist in the economic sense. It's saying it's your fault if you fail. But now, because you have millions of people unemployed for the first time in American history, there's a saying basically, or an idea that the government should actually help fix the economy. So it's the government responsibility. So now, for example, the fact that the government is sending checks to people, that's a complete direct legacy from the New Deal. Now that the government is helping banks and all these sort of things, give them millions of dollars, same thing that we had in 2008, it's because of the Great Depression. Everyone makes the connection how this is changing American economic sensibility. If you don't understand it, you can ask me, because that's a very important point. All right, so quick overview. He issues a bank holiday, shuts down all the bank. He gives a lot of fireside chats that people listen to the radio, where in it he motivates them that things are going to get better and to bring their money back into the bank. He creates a whole alphabet soup of agencies that, again, you probably don't need to know all of them if they ask about them. Probably biggest one you want to remember, things that we still have to this day, is the FDIC, which the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. If your money goes into the bank, the government will back up your money. Basically, if the bank goes bankrupt, the government will repay your money back. What else? Security Exchange Commission. Wall Street was not regulated. They did whatever they wanted to. That was a big cause of the stock market crash. So Security Exchange Commission is there to regulate what Wall Street is doing. Still there today. Still problems with Wall Street. There's many projects where the government creates jobs for people to lower the unemployment, like CCC or PWA, Public Works Administration. So they have big construction jobs, and you get two from that. You get one thing is you get projects to make the city that you live in look better, to improve people's life, to improve roads, to improve condition. On the other hand, you create jobs, and that lowers unemployment. So you get a double for any public project works that the government is doing. Like civilian conservation corps, a lot of young people go up and work the land to improve the land situation. Tennessee Valley Authority gives rural area electricity. A lot of people that never had access to electricity. Roosevelt gets a criticism from both sides of the political spectrum. Some people on the left side saying he's not doing enough, that he could do more, like Huey Long, was kind of like this general idea that everyone kind of like gets more financial help. And the right is thinking that he's turning America into a socialist nation. So basically both sides are not happy with this sort of things. And a famous case in the Supreme Court is Schechter versus the United States, where the government kind of regulates shchita, kind of kosher butchering. And the Supreme Court rules that the United States violated, overstepped its law by intervening in business. So some people, now the Supreme Court is saying that some of these legislation are really getting too much into people running their business. So it's one thing that you want to build some agencies and create some jobs, but you cannot go into people's businesses and regulate exactly what they do inside of it. We mentioned that Roosevelt tried to pack because he had problems with the Supreme Court ruling against him, he came up with this scheme of adding 6 more justices to the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court will be more liberal and not rule against them, and that event was known as court packing scheme. It did not work, and that's why we still have 9 justices in the Supreme Court. And that was one of his first major failure as president. Roosevelt got elected again. Another topic, if there's questions about race, that could be a question in the exam, continuity and change in race. It could be FDR and race relations. We must remember that African Americans are voting in big numbers for the Democratic Party. When Roosevelt gets elected, historically, the African Americans voted for the Republican Party. Why did historically they always vote for the Republican Party?
The Democrats were the ones that didn't want to give them equal rights.
And we're in the South that actually owned slaves.
All right. So Republican Republican historically is the party of Abraham Lincoln that released them from slavery, and the Democrat were historically the racist party of the South. But Roosevelt also changes when he gets elected in 1930s and start building alliances and changes relationship with African Americans, and the fact that he's bringing some African Americans to leadership or gives them job opportunity in the New Deal. But he's not going to give them civil rights because he doesn't want to lose the votes in the South. Okay, so it's a little change, but not as much. So the New Deal created programs for African American unemployed, but did not give him civil rights. Okay, so it's advancing their job situation, but not their equality. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it, what we need to know about FDR questions. All right, any other questions? So I gave you a couple of more DBQs that you might want to go over. And again, the point of the more DBQs you practice, the better chance, that you're prepared for the exam. So, you're not reading instruction and you kind of see what's going on. So I gave you industrial capitalism DBQ, constitution DBQ, kind of just to see the idea of the options. Anyone check some of these documents?
Yeah, I did the industrial capitalist one.
The reconstruction one.
Okay, so we also did reconstruction in the class, so I feel good about that one. I mean, again, if there's 4 different kinds of essays, it's kind of hard to figure out what they want. But if you kind of get the question, what the question is asking you, and you kind of start identifying what the 2 groups that I can get, I think you're on the right track at least to be successful. So let's just read this question and see what they want from us. Who wants to read? Who wants to read the question? Yes, Jen.
Evaluate the extent to which the rise of industrial capitalism fostered social change in the United States in the period from 1870 to 1910.
All right, so what did they want me to do in this question?
I feel like they're looking for, like, to what extent, like, how much did it help change, like, the Industrial Revolution? How did it help change, like, social reforms?
All right, so what are my key words in this question that I'm looking for? So what's the key words I underline?
Capitalism and social change.
Okay, so very good. So the underline, you read the question. Again, this is the first way we start. Stage one, I read the question. I read it one time, I read it a second time, I read it a third time. Don't rush, read the question a couple of times, just get the idea. Then you want to go in and underline to see, it's like, what are the focus of the question? Is it more on this word? Is more on that word? Where my focus is? So industrial capitalism, social change. That's the thing, very good, Jen, that I want to underline. And this is my time period. By the way, some of you wrote some essays and then you jumped, I don't know, like let's say there was a Jackson DBQ and some of you jumped to like Kansas, Nebraska. Like don't jump outside of the years. They give you a perimeter. If you need outside evidence, it's between those years, okay? If you want to bring outside evidence or any context, it's something that happens during this time, okay? So I look at these sort of things, and now sorry?
I was listening to Macro Learning. They were doing this DBQ, and
Great.
they said if you want, you could go for context like past or before. Is that true?
Yeah, for context before the essay. But now once I'm going into the document, when I get to the documents, I'm going to give outside evidence. And if I'm going to go inside these documents, I'm going to get, if I'm going for HIP analysis, it's inside. Context is before. That's the first paragraph essay, okay? But once I go inside the document, it's got to be between those years. Any other questions?
Does it matter like how my formatting looks for like the DBQ?
Well, the reader of the exam.
Like, can I just have like?
Sorry.
Can I just have, let's say, like, I don't have time for my context. I just write a thesis and
yes.
then 2 body paragraphs, and I don't have time for my conclusion.
Yes. You can go. You can skip the context, as I mentioned, because a lot of teachers recommend specifically for this exam because there's 10 points, not 7, and context is just worth 1 point. So you might skip the context and go straight into thesis and divide your paragraphs and do context at the end. They're expecting, though, the context usually in the beginning or with the thesis in the beginning. So you might want to leave a gap in the beginning for yourself just to get back to it. I mean, now you have a computer, so you can just, lift the lines up. You don't necessarily have to, it's not like when you write in a paper and you have to cross the whole thing up. So it's a little bit different. Any other questions? Ayala, yes.
Yeah, so I was wondering, should I write like context and then write my context and thesis and write my thesis? Or
I mean, I think it would be actually, I think it's very helpful for the reader of the exam if you write it that way because they can actually see it. I sometimes read some of your exam and I'm like, is this the thesis? I'm like, I'm not sure sometimes. I like kind of read it a few times. So I think it makes it very easy for the reader of the exam, to figure out very quickly what's going on.